Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video podcast brought to you by LutherOne. I'm your host Loic, and today we're navigating the intricate world of HR investments and their tangible effect on company profitability. To do so, we've invited a special guest, which we'll be introducing in a very short period. But first of all, let's get a bit of better understanding with some recent study in regards to this topic. Well, recent studies show that the financial impact of employee turnover is quite substantial, with the cost of replacing an individual ranging from 50% to 200% of their annual salary. Of course, this depending on their role. This stark statistic highlighted in O'Connor's research underscores the importance of effective retention strategies in mitigating these losses. Moreover, turnover costs U.S. businesses an estimated $1 trillion annually, as noted by SHRM, making it clear that the stakes of HR departments are higher than ever. These figures set a challenging backdrop for HR professionals striving to quantify the return on investment of their initiative and justify the investment in robust HR practices. We're joined by Robin Corralez, an HR leader with extensive experience in shaping strategies that enhance engagement and minimize turnover. Today, she'll share her insight and strategies on maximizing HR's impact. Thank you very much, Robin, for joining us.
To start off, Robin, again, thank you very much. If I could ask for a short introduction from your side for our audience, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Hi. Thank you so much for having me, Loic. I'm Robin Corralez. As Loic said, I am a Chief People Officer with about 25 years of experience in human resources, working across a variety of different companies, everything from advertising to manufacturing, and currently a SaaS leader. Excited to be here today and share some of my experiences, which hopefully will help your audience be able to quantify their investments in HR a little bit better.
Definitely, and thanks for that. I hope, and that's kind of the key goal here, is we want it to be as digestible as possible. So to our audience, sit down, get a coffee. We've got context for you. We've got 4 great questions as well. And hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be able to have a good understanding and potentially maybe even strategies that you can implement yourself to reduce overall turnover, but most importantly, to best understand how to quantify and what quantifying it even means in the first place, right? So to start off, let's kind of look back at the numbers that we've had with the 50% to 200% of the annual salary. But if we kind of push it a bit further from the CHRM, the average cost to replace an employee is now estimated at 6 to 9 months of the employee's salary, therefore highlighting the critical needs for effective retention strategy to avoid such financial strains, which definitely brings me to that first question, considering the cost of turnover. Robin, how do you approach demonstrating the return on investment of HR's retention efforts in a way that resonates with not anyone but the stakeholders?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. As you said, the costs of turnover are really high, and there's tremendous amount of studies that demonstrate how high it can get. But the first thing you really need to do is you need to calculate your turnover, right? So have an understanding of what your baseline turnover is, and then quantify those costs. There's even some online calculators that you can grab that will give you a more accurate picture of what your specific turnover cost is, which will include things like how much time does your interviewing team spend on interviewings? How long does it take to close different roles? And that'll help you get a solid cost of your actual turnover at your company, which will resonate more with stakeholders. Once you have that, let's say you're running at 20% turnover and you know what that cost is to the organization. The best way to measure the ROI is introducing a change and then measuring your turnover once again after that change has been implemented. So 2 super easy ways to get traction on that are in talent acquisition and onboarding, because these are 2 areas where retention efforts should really begin. And they're pretty easy to calculate. So let's just say, for example, you were running that 20% turnover, but 30% of it is coming from like first year turnover as it relates to, and you introduce an onboarding program and you see that first year turnover significantly decline, you can generally attribute with some pretty decent confidence that the effect of your onboarding program contributed to that reduction in turnover. This can help you with being able to justify the cost of that onboarding program and continue to secure incremental investments inside of it. You can also measure the productivity of a new hire on that onboarding. This is especially true in production-related positions, whether that's a sales role or an actual production employee. How quickly are they able to ramp? How quickly are they able to demonstrate results before and after the program introduction? These are great ways to gain credibility for your organization. The second, as I said, right, so onboarding, and then the second is in talent acquisition, because bringing on the right candidate makes a tremendous difference in what your first year turnover is going to look like. If you're having a lot of turnover within that first 90 days, that first 6 months, generally you can assume that you may not be selecting the right candidates in general. So if you implement something like a structured interviewing approach or some more robust recruiting operations types of activities, you're going to want to measure how does that impact, what's the impact on your organization's turnover within that first 6 months as well. And you can easily attribute, right, like the turnover to the more rigorous hiring standards that have been implemented. And hopefully that ends up lowering your first year turnover. You can put that dollar figure, right? Like if you understand what your turnover percentage is and what your turnover cost per employee is, you can then put that dollar figure on there and demonstrate that ROI to your stakeholders. If you're speaking in the same language as they are with regards to what is the actual cost, it's going to be much more receptive. And I think that recruiting and onboarding are the two easiest ways to very quickly demonstrate an ROI for your team and build some credibility, which may also then help you with other programs that you want to run that may be slightly harder to run an ROI on.
I love the answer. I absolutely love the answer. It's like the question itself was so complex and you managed to put it in such a digestible way. And yes, absolutely. The credibility is something that we also forget. Speaking their own language, also boosting the credibility in the process for the project and so on. That's key. But you mentioned it very well. Onboarding is definitely something important in this, and which kind of brings us to the second question, the full perfect connection. But as we do always love having a bit of back end, some data behind it. Well, if we look at one key information that we recently found was Brandon Hall Group shows that a strong onboarding process can improve new hire retention by 82% and productivity by over 70%, which is quite frankly ridiculous. It's a lot. Well, considering those statistics reveal a critical financial implication of the onboarding phase in mitigating early turnover and fostering a committed workforce, as very well mentioned by you as well in regards to that. Which brings me to the question, onboarding has a direct link to reducing first-year turnover, as it's now been definitely identified. Can you discuss the essential elements of an effective onboarding program that have proven successful in your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Onboarding is so crucial, especially today when more companies are distributed throughout multiple locations, whether that's multiple locations within a single country or even across multiple countries. And then you have fully remote. A successful program in onboarding doesn't just handle the basic issues of HR paperwork and making sure employees have equipment, but it also showcases the culture of the organization and it helps employees feel connected. Giving team members a really true understanding of what the organization does, like what does it make? How does it sell what it makes? Who does it compete against? And helping set up those employees with the tools that they have, the tools that are used to help them drive success. Also, sharing resources, who the go-tos are within departments, the department norms, and then the position expectations. Like a few of my very favorite aspects of onboarding programs that I've developed have been having a buddy program and not just selecting anybody as a buddy, but selecting somebody who that individual can truly connect with and will help them be successful within their team. It does a few things. One, it starts to develop that relationship with an individual who is not your manager. And then it also gives the person someone to talk to who isn't their manager, so that they don't feel as though they're maybe they're asking something that they should know. And so it defers that as well. The other thing I love to do is have new hires talk to team members in other departments. And that helps foster more connectivity with the intention of learning more about how the departments interact. Because the more someone understands about the culture, about how the work gets done, the higher the likelihood that they will feel connected, be successful, and be effective in their roles, especially if you're in an information organization or it's a professional level position where so much of your interactions, so much of your day-to-day work has to do with interactions of other teams, and you have to rely on other departments so much. So I think that, just circling back on that, making sure that employees feel connected, making sure that they understand what the company actually does and how it does it, and then understanding that some of the more informal expectations around the culture and within the department are three major keys to success in an onboarding program.
Yeah, there's even another term that we kind of use at LutherOne, is the honeymoon phase. I think it's also quite commonly used as well. But the honeymoon phase, as you correctly mentioned, is something very important in terms of ensuring a better trust and also loyalty from that employee, which directly aligns to specific key indicators that a company needs to best understand, which is something, for instance, LutherOne has been able to identify within the onboarding phase and understanding what exactly is required by employees. And I love that approach that you mentioned. We have it as well. I've seen it in previous jobs, and that's something I'm so glad it hasn't changed since COVID. Is so many companies still have the concept of a buddy. And I really agree with you that approach, that human connection, whether you're in a remote or in an office environment, has been extremely supportive on that one. Well, thank you very much for your answer on that one. I'm going to pass the mic to my dear colleague, Katie, who also had a few questions for you. Thank you.
Yes. Hi, Robin. Thank you for the answers. I mean, they've been great so far. One thing that was really coming to mind when you were talking about onboarding and how important it was and these buddy programs and getting them connected was engagement. So let's shift the focus from discussing some of these critical components of onboarding to addressing the challenges of demonstrating the value of engagement initiatives. So let's dive into the intricacies of quantifying the impact of these initiatives on a company's bottom line, which I can imagine as an HR professional is so hard to do. So next question, engagement is known to boost profitability, but its financial impact is hard to measure. How do you present the value of engagement initiatives to decision makers in an organization?
Yeah, it's a great question, Katie. So there are countless studies that demonstrate how high levels of engagement companies with high levels of engagement outperform their peers. And so if you're starting from scratch within an organization to get them to buy into engagement being important, I would definitely suggest pulling some of those studies, especially like Gallup has a ton of them, as a first start to get your stakeholders on board with the importance of engagement. And hopefully you're in an organization that has that shared value and sees the link to performance and engagement as inextricably connected. And if that's the case, I highly recommend utilizing like pulse or engagement surveys in order to really understand and measure the engagement of your teams as a first start and to support your initiatives. These can be done through tools, or they can be done through forms, right? Or just talking to your team members and getting an understanding of what is important to them. But this will give you some baseline data that you can use in order to, once again, measure what is the effectiveness of your programs that you're running. So, for example, if your employees feel like their manager isn't effective because you're asking questions in some sort of survey about the effectiveness of their manager, then you know that you should invest in manager development. If feedback shows that they don't believe that they can grow within your company, then you should invest in career families and career tracks and some sort of learning and development programs for your teams, and you can spend your time and energy there. But the key when talking to stakeholders is to be able to link that engagement initiative to what actually matters to your team members by showing them how it's impacting various levels of engagement scores. So you don't just want to measure like, oh, are you satisfied? Because that's not enough to drive decision making, but asking the inputs, right? Like asking about manager effectiveness, asking about career development, asking them about trust in leadership, and whether or not they have the right tools and resources to perform their job are all things that will impact engagement. And by measuring those things, you're able to direct your investments into areas that matter, that should drive impact, and then show your stakeholders the results of any programs that you run, and how, and again, right, it's about gaining that credibility, that continued support as an HR professional, that the programs that you implement matter and drive an impact on those different metrics. So that's kind of how I would go about it, Katie.
Yeah,
I love.
Sorry, go for it, Katie.
No, I was just gonna say I love the answer. I love talking about not only the annual surveys but the pulse surveys, but really the listening. So like listening to what your employees are actually saying and asking more than just, are you happy? Because there's so much more to an employee's experience than just, are you happy? Like, what does happy even mean? And I feel like that's something that a lot of organizations kind of miss, unfortunately, is really diving into how that employee is really feeling, but then also taking action. So the whole thing I was hearing when you were talking, Robin, was just, let's take action, like let's show our upper leadership, our executives, how we can make an impact using this employee's feedback.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely kind of, if you put it in a word, it's kind of identified as the engagement index and all the correlation it kind of links to, right? Within those, there's definitely the people development, there's the motivation, there's the talent management, there's the team efficiency, and all the other ones that you mentioned. But we had one last question from Katie. Katie, it's all yours.
Yes. So just going back to engagement, not necessarily the value, but more so interacting with the world that we live in today, with all of the different types of work that we're experiencing. So we all know after COVID, we shifted to remote, and then it's hybrid, and then it's back to office. And I know it's been very, very challenging for a lot of organizations to kind of balance engagement with various types of work. So next question, with the evolving nature of work, especially in remote settings, what strategies have you found effective in keeping employees engaged and loyal over time?
Yeah, so I said some of this already. I kind of referred to it in the onboarding piece of it, but getting employees to feel connected to an organization and to their peers really, really matters. It is like so important for people to know that they are not on an island by themselves, because it can definitely feel that way when you're working from your dining room or from your bedroom closet office, right? Like it can certainly feel that way. I love team building events, right? Like I love them. We're going to do some candle making soon. Things like that are always great. And we're going to do it remotely, right? Like we're going to do remote candle making. Should be a fun time. But even more important is developing this environment where employees can lean on each other for support and be vulnerable with one another and feel comfortable with that, so that they can make best friends at work, right? Like I think it's such a powerful question when one of the Gallup survey questions, right, is like, do you have a best friend at work? And I think that it is so important because you don't want to leave your best friends, right? So like what makes companies different is the people that work there and the connections that you make. And it's so much harder to make those connections in a remote environment. So creating a culture where people can be vulnerable with each other, where people can feel like they can ask others for help and they can lean on them for support is a huge step in making sure that employees feel connected to each other. And then connecting them back to the organization, right? So the second part of that is it's really easy for information vacuums to happen in organizations in general, especially in a remote organization. So what happens is people don't feel like they know what's happening within the company, right? They're just doing their job, they're pretty siloed, and they don't really have a lot of information. So they start to make things up. And so ensuring that there's continuous transparent communication, and I'm a huge fan of transparency, about what is happening across the organization, across different teams, and even within your team is super important. So frequent all hands, and that doesn't mean all company hands, right? But could mean all department hands or all team hands, at different levels. Company dashboards, like just sharing, right? Like what's happening, and OKRs, common OKRs in a place where they're housed and stored so people can see what are the most important things that each team is working on. Goal setting. These are all different ways that you can keep employees connected to or back to the organization and what is happening, so that people are aligned and they're in the know, so that they feel like they're working towards shared goals. And then, I think the third thing here is that team members need to feel heard. I talked about pulse surveys and engagement surveys, but they need to feel heard. And whether or not you use those and you publish the action plans as a result, because that's a huge thing, right? Like, don't just listen and not do anything, because then that demonstrates that you don't really care what they said. So I heard you, but I don't care. So listening to employees and then publishing how you're going to take action as a result of what you heard. Again, whether it's using pulse surveys or just talking to people and understanding what's on their mind and going back out to them, and demonstrating your willingness to take that action based on their feedback goes a tremendous way in helping employees feel like they are part of the company, what they say matters, and ultimately impacting retention and hopefully increasing loyalty to the organization as well.
Yeah. The thing I'm hearing again is just like taking that action and actually like listening to the employees, but also making them feel more than just a number, because I've worked at companies where I hadn't met a single soul that I worked with, and it was a really weird experience. And, not being in person every day is really hard to build those connections. I think that's ever so important. But then the listening part is, I feel like, where sometimes organizations miss that mark. They're taking all this data and then like, what are you doing with it? And what are you doing with it in a timely manner? Because if you wait a year, that person might not be there anymore, right? To see that action actually happen. So love the answers, Robin.
Thanks, Katie.
This definitely brings credibility as well. It's because at the end of the day, if you look at the models, the different business models that we have, whether it's hybrid, in office and remote, they're evolving constantly. And therefore, the approach we need to have to it needs to follow that trend. Because right now, and it was something I was discussing with Katie earlier that we've kind of seen as well from our data, is that hybrid is, to us, seems to be dying in a certain way, because now there's more of an approach as fully office or fully remote. And I do tell my audience, type on internet, hybrid, is it dying versus remote versus office? See for yourself, the numbers are changing constantly. And that model 2 years ago was a complete opposite, was, oh yeah, hybrid's the next new thing. But the thing that hasn't really evolved beyond it is the model might change, but there's still human beings, there's still your employee, that still have an onboarding. And that word engagement and that word return on investment on engagement is not just the fluffy words. There is much more to it behind it, which we hope you understood via this video podcast, and better understanding that there is, as mentioned before, the engagement index that kind of correlates with everything that we mentioned today. And most importantly, the call to action, because these video podcasts that we're having here is to learn, to understand, and to share input from our guests like Robin, but you need to take the call to action that follows from the insight that you found, because we can give you as many podcasts as we want, but we won't make the change. So on that note, thank you very much, Robin. Thank you very much, Katie, for joining us on this video podcast. Thank you to our audience.